In this video, we are looking at subtraction. 3a. Subtract negative 41 plus 61i from 15 plus 40i. 15 plus 40i will have to be first. Subtract all that you see. So now we have a negative in front of a bracket. So notice we have a negative in front of the bracket. This means a negative times a negative would be a positive. So we'll get positive 41. A negative times a positive. That negative times that positive will give us a negative. And so we'll get negative 16i. Those are the like terms, the real part. Adding those two numbers, we get 56. Then we have 40 subtract 16i. Those are like terms. We will get plus 24i. The next question is subtract all of this from all of that. Which one will come first? That one will be first. Now subtraction sign and all of that in brackets. Hope that makes sense. So now we have a negative once again in front of a bracket. Negatives in front of brackets change all the signs. So a negative times a negative will be a positive 12. Then we have a negative times a negative will be a positive 15i. Next thing, we are circling the real parts. In other words, the whole numbers. So we have minus 12 plus 12, that will give us 0. But this is the real part. And then we have the imaginary parts, which are the like terms. Plus 20i plus 15i will give us. So 20i plus 15i will give us 35i. So our answer here is 0 plus 35i. The next question is simplify and write in rectangular form. 4a. That's our question. All we have to do is multiply. Do you remember something called the distributive property? That means the number on the outside times the first number inside the bracket, then it will be the number on the outside times the second number within the bracket. Let's look. So we're going to multiply minus 5i times 4. This will give us minus 20i. The second step will be minus 5i times 3i. This will give us minus 15i squared. So the 20i will go at the back because that is the imaginary part. Notice it was a negative 20i. And so the 15i squared will go in the front. Also a negative 15i squared. But I squared is minus 1. So where you see I squared, you will substitute minus 1. Negative 15 times minus 1 will give us a positive 15. So we get the real part being positive 15 minus 20i, which is the imaginary part. So that is our format for a rectangular form. It's the real number followed by the imaginary part. Now we have b. Here it's like FOIL method. To a binomial multiplied by a binomial. So it has two parts. So all we have to do is follow the FOIL method. So the FOIL method is first, outer, inner, and then the last terms. So it is the same thing what we've learned from grade 9. So multiplying the first terms, we will get 1 times 5 will give us 5. 1 times 5i will give us plus 5i. Then the inner terms, plus 3i times 5 will give us plus 15i. Then we have plus 3i times plus 5i will give us 15i squared. So now we can look at the like terms. we want to look at the real numbers and place them in front. So notice where we see I squared, we can always substitute -1. So we have like terms in the middle. 5i plus 15i will give us 20i. And where we see I squared, we will substitute -1. So substituting -1, we will then get -15 plus 5, which will give us -10, plus the 20i, which is the imaginary part. That's our final answer. There are unlike terms, therefore we cannot go further than there. Right, C's question is very similar to B. Pause the video and attempt it, and then you can see if you are right. So using the FOIL method, 3 times I is 3i. I times 2i is -2i squared. The inner terms will now be -1 times 3 will give us -3. And then the last terms, we have -1 times -2i will give us a positive 2i. Now we have to put the like terms together. The like terms here are plus 3i plus 2i will give us a positive 5i. Then we have -2i squared. Where we see I squared, we will substitute -1. So -3 follows. So -2 times -1 will give me a positive 2. So positive 2 minus 3 will give me -1, followed by plus 5i. So our answer there is -1 plus 5i. That underlined in green is the real part. Don't think because it has a negative in front that it's not real. Don't forget that negative whole numbers are still real numbers. Going on to D, we have binomial times a binomial using the FOIL method. 6 times 2, 3 times 2 equals to 6. 3 times -4 is -12i. 2i times 2 will give us plus 4i, and multiplying the last terms we'll get plus 2i times -4i will give us -8i squared. Now the like terms are in the center, which is -12i plus 4i. Put those together in a calculator. -12 plus 4 will give me -8. So at the end we have -8i squared. Where we see I squared, we will substitute -1. So -8 times -1 will give me a positive 8. Positive 8 and 6 gives me 14. We left with right. So our final answer there is 14 minus 8i. In E, we have 3 plus I all squared. So first we will square the first term, square the last term. For the middle term, it becomes 3 times I times 2 with a positive sign. So squaring a binomial is very simple. Square the first term, 3 squared, square the last term, positive I squared. For the middle term, you write down the same sign, 3 times I times 2. Right? So 3 squared is 9, I squared is I squared. The center term, 2 times, write down a positive sign, 3 times I. Okay, so we multiply what we see in the brackets using the same sign and multiplying all of that by 2. So here we'll get 3i times 2, which will give us 6i. So positive 6i in the center. Do note that this sign will always be positive when squaring a binomial. Binomial means 2 terms. Right, so moving on, we'll do the same thing to the next bracket. So there's our negative sign, and now we will have to square everything in the bracket and place it within the square bracket. So square the first term, we'll get 9. Square the last term, we'll get positive I squared. Do notice that minus I times minus I in the FOIL method will always result in a positive I squared. For the center term, we'll say 2 times 3 times I with a negative sign in front. So 3 times negative I gives me negative 3I. Multiplied it onto by 2, I get negative 6I. So I have the all that's on the outside here, all that's on the outside, subtract all of this. So pause the video at this point and see if you can continue, and then mark it to see if you were right. So we have 9 plus 6I plus I squared. We will have to distribute this negative to each term. So a negative times a positive 9 will give us negative 9. A negative times a negative will give us a positive 6I. A negative times a positive will give me a negative I squared. Notice that there are opposite signs. When there's a negative on the outside of the bracket, that positive became a negative, that negative became a positive, that positive became a negative. 9 minus 9 will give me 0. And then we have plus 6i will give me plus 12i squared. Plus 6i will give us plus 12i. Plus I squared minus I squared, those will cancel. Our final answer there is 0 plus 12i. F's example, using the FOIL method, 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times minus root 5i will give us minus 2 root 5i. Practically, we are pushing it together. Then for the middle one, we have 1 times root 5i, which will give us plus 1 root 5i. Then the last step is the outer terms, which will be 5, the root 5i times root 5i. A negative times a positive is a negative, so we'll get 5i squared. So do note that root 5 times root 5 is just a positive 5 without the root sign, and I times I is I squared. Does that make sense? So we'll go to the next step. So we have 2 minus 2 root 5i, so minus 2 root 5i plus 1 root 5i, so minus 2 plus 1 is minus 1, so you will have minus root 5i minus 5i squared. So notice here we will have all of this. We have to substitute minus 1 where we see I squared. So minus 5 times minus 1 will give us a positive 5. So 2 plus 5 will give us 7. We'll have 7 minus 5 root I. Going to G. So notice that this is example G. Foiling it all out, what do you get? A half times 1 is a half. A half times minus I is a minus half I. Minus half I times 1 will give me a minus half I. Then we have minus half I times minus I. A negative times a negative is a positive, so I'll get a positive half I squared. Notice we have like terms in the center. It will not result in 0. Please think about this. So minus half will give us minus 1. Notice there that we are subtracting minus half. In other words, I have a negative half and I'm subtracting another half from it. This means I will get a bigger number. So that bigger number is going to be, so a minus half, you can punch this into your calculator, will give me minus 1. So minus 1 times I is minus I. Plus, so where we see I squared, we can substitute minus 1. So a half times minus 1 will give us a minus half. So a minus half plus half will give us 0 minus I. Does that make sense? That's our final answer. J. So notice J, we'll have to do the FOIL method first. Take that answer of the first two brackets, the answer of the first two brackets, and multiply it by the third bracket. So now it will become a trinomial multiplied by a binomial. That's what will happen here in J. This one will take more effort. So first step is to say these are the two that I'm going to multiply by each other first. So 2 times minus 3 will give us minus 6. 2 times 3i will give us plus 6i. Minus I times minus 3 will give me positive 3i. Minus I times 3i will give me a negative 3i squared. So that's all my first bracket. All of this will be multiplied by the second bracket. Now let's simplify that first bracket on the left hand side. Let's simplify. Notice in the center we have like terms. So we have minus 6, the like terms, add them up, we'll get plus 9i minus 3i squared, and all multiplied by the second bracket. Pause the video, continue from here, and see if you're able to do it. So the first step here will be minus 6 times 4. Okay, then we'll have to say 4 times plus 9i. 4 times minus 3i squared. So multiplying the first one, we'll get minus 24. So minus 6 times 4 is minus 24. Plus 9i times 4 is plus 36i. Then we have minus 3i squared times 4 will give us minus 12i squared. All that is in the first bracket. Now multiplying the second part will be minus 5i times minus 6 will give us a positive 30i. Minus 5 times plus 9i will give us minus 45i squared. Minus 5i times minus 3i squared will give us plus 15i to the power 3. Now we'll have to look for like terms. So we have minus 24 plus 66i, 36i plus 30i gives us plus 66i. Those are the like terms. Looking at another group of like terms, we have these minus 12i squared minus 40i minus 45i squared. So minus 12i squared minus 45i squared, put them together, I get minus 57i squared, and then we have our one with the cube at the end. So our first one is minus 24, which is by itself, and then we have 66i, right? And now we have 57i squared. Now remember, wherever we see I squared, we substitute minus 1. Now we have 15i cubed. Remember what we learned earlier, that we have to break that I cubed into I squared times I. Okay? And so where we see I squared, we substitute minus 1. So this is what we mean about the I cubed. So the I cubed is I squared times I, which is minus 1. That's the same minus 1 I placed there. So notice that this becomes plus 57. So plus 57 minus 24 will give me 33. Then we have minus 15i here. So 66i plus 57, which is that number there, minus 15i. So this became 15i. So our final answer here will be 33 66i minus 15i. This will give us 51i. So our final answer will be in the next example, determine I2. So they want us to solve for I2. So this means I have to make I2 subject to the formula. So making I2 subject to the formula, I will have to take I1 to the other side. So I3 minus I1, we now have I2. Given that I3 is equal to that, and I1 is equal to this, we now substitute those values for I3 and I1. So substituting them, it now becomes normal subtraction as we learned earlier. Please note that there's a negative in front of those brackets. So we have the first bracket, minus 18 plus 13i. Adding up the real numbers, so we get 25 minus 18. This will give us 7. And now we have the i's. 11i plus 13i will give us plus 24i. So our final answer is 7 plus 24i. In this next example, we have z1 is equal to that, z1 equals that, z2 is equal to this, and z3 is that. The question says you must multiply z1. z1 dot means times, so z1 times z3. So in this question, these three items are given, z1, z2, and z3. Then the first question, 6b, says multiply z1 times z3. So the z means complex numbers. So there's our complex number, place it in a bracket. There's our complex number, place in a bracket. This is the first step. Next, we use the FOIL method. 2 times minus 4 is minus 8. 2 times 2i plus 4i minus 3i times minus 4 will give me plus 12i, and minus 3i times a positive 2i will give us minus 6i squared. Notice wherever I see I squared, I will substitute minus 1, but you do have like terms in the center. So adding up those like terms, we get plus 16i, 4i plus 12i gives us plus 16i. Now where I see that I squared, don't forget to substitute a minus 1 there. And so minus 6 times minus 1 will give me positive 6. So minus 8 plus 6 will give me minus 2. And then in the center, we have the plus 6i. So minus 8 plus 6 gives us minus 2 plus 16i. In the next example, we have 2z2. Whatever z2 is, which is 7i, this will now mean I have to substitute the 7i where I see z2. Now I see minus 2 z1. So wherever I see z1, I will substitute 2 minus 3i. So substituting that, that's what it looks like. This is the first step. Notice that this is the question, and z1, z2, and z3 are given. So I substitute and I get 1 mark just to do that. I didn't follow the distributive property on the right hand side, but before that, 2 times minus 7i will give me minus 14i. Minus 2 times 2 is minus 4. A negative times a negative is a positive. 2 times 3i will give me 6i. Okay, as simple as that. Good. Negative times a negative is a positive. Now we have like terms. Minus 14i plus 6i will give me minus 8i. And then I have the minus 4, which is the real number in front. That is the final answer. Now we're looking at the conjugate. Z is equal to a plus bi. Z means the complex number. The conjugate of that is equal to a minus bi. The sign changes only on the imaginary part. Notice the notation. Z with that line on top means conjugate. So it's the conjugate complex number. The plus became a minus. Do continue with these examples. Try them again until you get them right. Watch this video over and over if you have to until you understand.